Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. We are going to start talking about the causes of the Civil War. So instead of just giving you the slides, I wanted to go over some stuff with you. So we're going to go through the slides together. And then when you get to step 3, I believe, you'll be able to have access to this PowerPoint without me talking over it so you can view it as you need to when you go to take the quiz. All right, so before we get to the causes of the Civil War, let's just go into some background information. Remember that, the North was very different from the South in terms of what they did for a living. The North was very industrial, a lot of manufacturing was going on in the North, and in the South, it was more farming. So we have to keep that in mind. So tariffs or taxes were placed on imported goods in order to make Americans want to buy products from America. So basically, imported goods were taxed more. So that's goods coming from other countries were taxed more so that people would just buy the products that were already in the United States instead of buying from another country. Okay. So again, this is all before the Civil War. Since the North produced manufactured goods, the South was in need of the manufactured goods, and they would usually buy from the northern states. So again, that was good for the North. However, in 1857, Congress lowered the tariffs or taxes on imported goods, which then made it cheaper to buy goods from other countries. So now the South, that was buying all their goods from the North, is now buying their goods from other countries. So the North is losing money. So who's going to be upset by this action? What do you think, the North or the South? If you thought the North, then you are correct, because like we just said before, the North is losing out on money because the South is now buying products from, and actually everybody is buying products from other countries. So there became this split. And if you look at the map, we have the North, the South, and the West. And basically everybody in those three sections, they had loyalty to their own section of the country instead of having loyalty to the country as a whole. So this is called sectionalism, which is up here at the top, okay? So the split between the North and the South and the West was called sectionalism. They each have loyalty to their own section of the country. So this is one of the first causes of the Civil War. Another piece of background information that I just want to remind you of at this time is that slavery is still happening in the country. And I know we talked about slavery in the beginning of the year, but it's going to come up again. So slavery at this time, yes, it was in both the North and the South, more heavily in the South. So we're going to keep that in mind. All right, let's now talk about the Compromise of 1850. This is another cause of the Civil War. So if you remember, during the California Gold Rush, people from the eastern side of the United States were rushing to California. They wanted to find gold. So California, the population of California, increased dramatically and really, really quickly. So the question came up, should California be admitted to the Union? And when I say Union, I mean the United States, to the country. Should they be admitted to the Union as a free or a slave state? So most people that lived in California, they were against slavery. They didn't want slavery. However, if California became a free state, then there would be more free states than slave states. And this made the South angry because when Congress is going to write laws and bills, they feel that the free states, the northern states, would have more of control than the southern states. And they think that, things would be put in place to go against slavery, and they don't want that. So a compromise was created. So the Compromise of 1850 allowed California to join as a free state. It then established Texas as a slave state. So there we go. It balanced it out and created the Utah and New Mexico territories, which would decide on slavery by popular sovereignty. So those people in that area, which is over here, Utah and New Mexico, when there got enough population there, they would then vote on whether or not they should be a slave or a free state. And the Fugitive Slave Act, which we'll talk about in a minute, was also enforced to please the southern states. So as you can see, the Compromise of 1850 tried to settle the dispute by letting California join as a free state, Texas as a slave state, and we're going to talk about the Fugitive Slave Act in a second. All right, the Fugitive Slave Act. This act required that all escaped slaves were to be returned to their masters. So this was part of the Compromise of 1850. I'm just going to go back quick to the map. So as you learned in the previous lesson, there were many slaves that were escaping the South and going into the North, and they would have freedom in the North. So this changed things because the Fugitive Slave Act now said that if someone found an escaped slave, they had to be returned to their masters. It was the law. It also stated that the free states had to abide by the law, and the North was not in favor of this act. All right, next up is the Missouri Compromise and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So really, the major topic here is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. But in order to understand why the Kansas-Nebraska Act was a cause of the Civil War, we have to go back and revisit the Missouri Compromise. So the Missouri Compromise, and this was passed in 1820, said that Missouri could enter the Union or the country as a slave state, but required that any new territories or states that were formed north of Missouri's southern border would then be, slavery would be outlawed. So let's take a look. So here's Missouri, okay, this red state right here, and this black line here, this is the southern border. And at the time, in 1820, the line extended west to right about here. So all of this territory north of Missouri, of that southern border, this purple area, this area was supposed to be free territory, so territory that outlawed slavery. This was according to the Missouri Compromise. So now, and remember that was 1820, so now in 1854, now there's enough people in this territory, which is split up into two, the Nebraska territory and the Kansas territory, that now they want to figure out what they're going to do about the issue of slavery again. They want people here, the people want one thing, but the Missouri Compromise said another. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act was created, and it stated that the remainder of the Louisiana Territory, which is here, the blue area, would be split up into two territories, Nebraska and Kansas, and would allow people in the territory to decide on the question of slavery. So popular sovereignty, they're going to be able to vote to decide if slavery should be permitted. However, that goes against the Missouri Compromise that was created 34 years before that said that slavery was supposed to be outlawed in this area. So who's going to be angry by this? Originally, slavery was supposed to be outlawed. Now they're saying, okay, the people here can decide whether or not they want to allow slavery in their territory. Is the North going to be upset, or is the South going to be upset? If you chose the North, then you are correct. Okay, so the North is going to be upset because originally slavery was outlawed here. All right, another cause of the Civil War is the Dred Scott decision. So Dred Scott was a slave. He was born a slave. He was taken to Illinois, which was a free state. Before he was in Illinois, and you can look at the map here, before he was in Illinois, he was in all of these different slave states. So he was in the red here. The red shows you the slave states. But then when he gets taken to Illinois, okay, here, and he goes to Wisconsin as well, these are free. Illinois was a free state and Wisconsin was a free territory. So Scott comes back to Missouri, in the red state right here, which is a slave state. And he thinks that because he was already in free territory in a free state, that he should now be free. So him and his wife filed for freedom because they had been in a free territory and knew that the courts, the Supreme Courts and the higher courts, were following the doctrine of once free, always free, meaning that once you go into a free territory or a free state, then you are now a free person. So just because he came back to a slave state, him and his wife think, well, we were already in a free area, we should now be free. And they knew that the courts were sometimes granting slaves the permission to then be free. So he takes his case to court. However, what's interesting here is that the Supreme Court ruled that they could not hear his case because slaves were not citizens. So again, this is a difference between the North and the South. Who's going to be upset by this? The Supreme Court is saying that a slave is not a citizen. Is the North going to be upset, or is the South going to be upset? If you chose the North, then you are correct. Okay? So this, again, added fuel to the fire, making the North more angry about slavery. All right, another cause of the Civil War was states' rights. This issue goes back to when the Constitution was first written. So remember, we talked about the differences between Hamilton and Jefferson. Hamilton wanted a very strong federal government. Jefferson wanted strong state governments. So this continued all the way up until the Civil War. So this controversy was over whether or not the federal government had too much power. The northern states, like we just talked about Hamilton, wanted a strong national government. However, the southern states didn't want the federal government to take away their rights, so they wanted states to have more power. They wanted to be able to make their own decisions. So again, this argument between the North and the South added to the problems leading up to the Civil War. All right, the last straw, and I know we've used this phrase a couple times, the last straw that broke the camel's back. If you remember, you could put all this weight on a camel's back, but sometimes just adding, one more pound, or in this case, one more straw, would break the camel's back. Just like this was the last thing before the Civil War. This is what really exploded all the tension that was brewing from the causes that we just talked about. And this was the election of 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was elected. So, as you might already know, Lincoln was against slavery and he believed in a strong federal government. So he's aligning himself more with the northern states. We just talked about that the northern states wanted a strong federal government and the northern states were more against slavery. But his goal was to keep all the states in the Union. The southern states were threatening to secede, or meaning break away. So you'll often hear that the Civil War was about Lincoln trying to keep the country together. And that was his goal, but it does turn, and we'll talk about this in a little while, it does turn to him trying to abolish slavery as well. So the southern states were opposed to Lincoln's beliefs. They didn't want him making laws that would affect them, trying to get rid of slavery. They didn't want that. Southern states felt they had the right to leave the United States or secede, like I just used that word before. South Carolina was the first state to secede. They led the secession, and 10 other states followed. So 11 states seceded or broke away from the United States. They formed a new country that they called the Confederate States of America. Lincoln disagreed and thought they didn't have the right to form a different country, so he sent in troops to stop them, and this began the Civil War. So if we talk about the immediate cause of this Civil War, like what caused the fighting, it was the secession of the states, them breaking away. So they broke away, and then the fighting began. However, all of the things that we just talked about, the Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Dred Scott decision, states' rights, and should the federal government have more power or should the states have more power? All of this led up to the Civil War. These were causes of the Civil War. All right, so you can stop the video now. You can go on to step 2. There are a couple of videos that you can watch. They're really short, and we suggest you watch them. And then in step 3, like I said earlier, you're going to be able to view this presentation without me speaking. So if you need to go back while you're doing the quiz and reread anything that you want, you don't have to watch the video all over again. All right, guys, if you have any questions, please email us and we will talk to you soon.